The success which attended the movement was due almost entirely to the great support rendered by all classes of the people. When referring to the difference between the events of this period and former efforts to secure the freedom of the country, it is to be noted that at no previous time had there been such an overwhelming demonstration of support by the people as there was in the ballot boxes during that period. In consequence, there was not the weakness which affected other efforts in our history when, in the event of a leader being killed or captured, a disaster followed in its wake. It is a matter of satisfaction that this effort of the Irish people did not call for a very big sacrifice in the matter of numbers, but it was very noticeable how willing all were to render any support that was within their power. When referring to the fact that major freedom had been accomplished, it is, of course, to be noted that 6 counties are still outside of the jurisdiction of the Republic. In my view, for what it is worth, that is the testing case for the future. We ought to be capable of obtaining the consent of the people of those 6 counties within a reasonable space of time. The pay lasted for a very long period. Now it has passed away almost from the memory of the people. A special effort on the part of our countrymen should ensure better conditions for those that are here and possible acquiescence of the vast majority of those who are outside. We may perhaps be criticized for not having secured the whole of the country for our people. We can afford to put up with that criticism. There isn't much left to be done for those who come after us. And what has been done has been well done. Looking over the long history of the country, one can see how very little there was between victory and defeat on certain occasions during that long time. If we have snatched a victory where others failed, we did so with the grace of God, the support of the people, and the goodwill of most of the nations. And what remains to be done now can be undertaken with a good heart. The Bureau of Military History has requested me to make some observations on the movement which eventually secured the freedom of the greater part of Ireland from foreign domination. It was a democratic movement having very few of the distinguishing features of previous efforts at freedom, inasmuch as there were many leaders, and the movement did not confine itself merely to a military problem. It took up the question of wresting the control of civil as well as military control from the British authorities. It was, as I have said, a democratic movement in which its principal force came from the people and from the support which the people rendered to it. It was national in effect. The civil side, to which not so much reference has been made in most of the works that have been compiled about that period, had reference to the courts of the country and the general system of local government which was then in operation. In the case of the courts, most of the work was undertaken and discharged by the people's courts. In some cases, there were competent legal authorities placed on the bench. There were at least 4 High Court judges, and in the case of the lower courts, justice was administered by selected persons of repute and held in great respect in the particular neighbourhoods. My activities were largely directed towards replacing the British Local Government Board, as it was called, in this country. The actual name of it was the Irish Local Government Board. And after a period lasting over 2 years, control was entirely taken away from the British administration and centred in the Department of Local Government functioning under the Dáil Éireann. In that case, while acting as minister, I had the advantage of the services of Mr. O'Higgins as deputy minister and some other members of the Dáil in responsible positions in that department. The principal problem which affected us was the withdrawal of government grants which had been usually paid to the various local authorities. When it was found that these local authorities could only get these monies by being subject to the British Department of Control, they relinquished the monies in question and a torrent to the Dáil Éireann. That, in a few short words, is the story of that section of the movement. It was one of the departments of state set up under the Dáil Éireann, which functioned as a government throughout the country. The Bureau of Military History has asked me to place on record some observations on the events which led up to the restoration to Irishmen of the military and political control of their country. A great national resurgence after the rebellion in 1916 found expression in a nationwide support of the Sinn Féin organisation, which in a comparatively short time had branches in every parish. At the general election of 1918, Sinn Féin won over 70 seats, thus qualifying over 70 Sinn Féin representatives to be members of Parliament at Westminster. But the Irish representatives ignored the House of Commons and proceeded to set up Dáil Éireann, an Irish Parliament with a President, Vice President, and Ministers for Finance, Home Affairs, Agriculture, Industry and Labour, Defence, External Affairs and Local Government. Previous efforts at gaining Irish control, that is up to the end of the 18th century, had been military contests. Political agitation for some 40 years prior to the Sinn Féin resurgence had been carried on by Irish members of Parliament at Westminster concurrently with a vigorous land agitation in Ireland. Now, for the first time, British military, police, and civil administration were challenged, not by a political party only, but by a democratic parliament and an enthusiastic people. One of the early decisions of the Dáil was to authorise the issue of a republican loan, internal and external. Within a few months, a sum of over £375,000 was raised in Ireland, and after a year, about 4 times that sum was raised in the United States. Following out the Irish policy of taking over the government of the country, alternative courts were established. They were on the model of the system in operation, and they gave expression to the national desire to dispense with British institutions. Reputable and respected citizens were appointed to perform the court functions discharged by police magistrates, while in the case of the higher courts, the Minister for Home Affairs was given the necessary authority to appoint 3 practising barristers, 2 of whom subsequently became judges of the High Court and Supreme Court. Litigation, however, was not imposed on people. Differences between citizens could be and were the subject of arbitration. General public policy being opposed to the use of British institutions, only unavoidable cases were brought before the judges appointed by the Crown, and usually permission to do so was sought from the political organisation. Political and military developments in Ireland were well known to the British Cabinet, and at one time it was reputed to favour a distinction in dealing with Irish citizens engaged in political affairs as distinct from operations under the Ministry for Defence, spreading rumours that it was not intended to interfere with persons engaged in political matters. That phase was of short duration, as was evidenced by new legislative proposals imposing proportional representation system of election on the local government franchise. This was in the mistaken belief that the proportional representation system of election would prevent a Sinn Féin victory at the local government elections to be held early in 1920. Further legislation was passed, giving the British authorities absolute power to award pensions at maximum rates to local government officials, irrespective of local authorities, so that when and if there was a conflict between the British and the Irish officials, having their superannuation safeguarded by the Crown would stand against Irish opinion. Finally, this new code dispensed with the legal formalities hitherto prescribed for safeguarding all rates, and gave authority to any person who held a decree under the Criminal and Malicious Injuries Code against a rate levying authority to seize rates for payment. This legislation was in conflict with natural justice. Attacks on police and military led to the gradual abandonment of isolated barracks and made it necessary to have stronger and larger concentrations. Had it been possible for the British to maintain police and military in small units, political activity would have been hampered and restricted. Foreign newspapermen, as well as British, were impressed by the solidarity of the people, the gradual decline in the control by the British of the civil administration, and the prompt assumption of authority by the ministerial departments of the All-Ireland. In no sphere of civil administration was there such a series of attempts made to break Irish control as in local government. Several local government representatives were murdered by police. Hundreds were persecuted or interned. Monies raised by taxation on Irish people and voted to local authorities were withheld. In an endeavour to smash Irish local government, war was made on hospitals, relief organisations, assistance to destitute, wages of labourers, salaries of officials, utterly regardless of the misery resulting had they succeeded. Ireland had the appearance at this period of an armed camp. Sentries were on guard at all places likely to be seized for use as a military post. Barbed wire surrounded the approaches to sentries, barracks, and many public buildings. Armoured cars and lorry loads of soldiers, police, and auxiliaries paraded roads and streets. Police and auxiliaries had been recruited for service in Ireland during the 2 years prior to the truce, drawn from the lowest strata of society in Great Britain. Where there were exceptions, they, The new recruits had fallen as low as their comrades. Roads were trenched, bridges destroyed. Ultimately, 3,000 bridges had to be rebuilt or reconditioned. British armed forces consisted of 3 or 4 divisions. Even if they lost engagements, they were still strong numerically, and they had and held exhaustive supplies and stores of munitions. But civil administration had passed to the Irish. When therefore the Viceroy summoned a Parliament to meet in Dublin, 4 persons only responded. 4 elected on the Trinity College franchise. 124 representatives ignored the summons. Crown forces marched out 12 months after treaty negotiations, 3 or 4 divisions strong. A couple of companies in reservation and 5 posts only remained.